This virtual town hall meeting is presented by Indiana Town Halls and WFYI Productions, with support from these partners.
Good evening, I'm David BARRAS. Welcome to a town hall meeting featuring the Democrat candidates for Congress in Indiana's 5th Congressional District. We held a similar town hall event last night for the GOP candidates. A town hall for the primary winners will be held in October. The event is being staged by a new nonprofit organization known as Indiana Town Halls. It was founded by an activist named Les Swern and inspired by bipartisan town halls conducted by GOP State Senator John Ruckelhaus and Democratic State Representative Ed Delaney. Our website is indianatownhalls.org. Indiana Town Halls partners include WFYI Productions, the Indiana Citizen, the Mike Downs Center at Purdue-Fort Wayne, Indiana Campus Compact, and Informing to Empower Democracy. The candidates tonight include Jennifer Christie, Christina Hale, Andrew Jacobs Jr., and Dee Thornton. For fairness, we'll be going in alphabetical order. A quick note about timing. Candidates are asked to limit opening statements to 30 seconds and may take up to a minute to respond to questions. They will then be given a minute for closing statements at the end of this town hall, which will last about an hour. But first, we begin with the opening statements, and we start with Jennifer Christie. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Christie, and I'm running for real change on important issues like climate action and healthcare for all. I'm a mom of 4 young children, and I've spent my career mostly as a scientist in environmental chemistry and leading as a process improvement leader in clinical trials. I am a candidate that believes in working on important issues, and therefore I am the only candidate to have released a climate agenda and supporting the Green New Deal along with Medicare for all. We don't need more politicians in Washington. What we need is new thinking, authentic leadership. It's time to send a scientist and a mom to fight like a mother.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale, your turn.
Thank you for being here, everyone. I'm Christina Hale. I was a teen mom. I worked really hard to put myself through Purdue University and my son Owen through school too. As a top executive at a global NGO, Kiwanis International, headquartered here, I dedicated my career to issues that had a positive impact on children, youth, and public health. As a state representative, I earned my reputation working across the aisle to get good things done for people here. If elected, I'm going to take that ethic, that attitude, and that experience to serve you as your representative in Congress. Thank you.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andrew Jacobs Jr., your turn.
Thank you, David. I'm Andy Jacobs, and I went to Indiana University, where I studied history and I minored in computer science. And while I was there, I spent time on my summers on Capitol Hill working for Julia Carson, and then for the Committee on Ways and Means. I've had a long interest and fascination with public policy and law. I went to law school at the Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law here in town, and I'm currently working full-time as a deputy prosecutor under Ryan Mears. I'm running because I believe in progressive change with a cautious and risk-aware implementation. So I think you'll find that I'm very progressive-minded, but at heart, in my heart, but in my head, I can be very conservative. Thank you.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton, your turn.
Good evening. I'm Dee Thornton. We are in the crisis of our lifetime, and things are not going back to where they were anytime soon. We must have leaders who are willing to work together to solve big problems. We can move our country past the politics of division and fear and prepare our country for the future. We must get our country back on track. I offer that kind of courageous, principled leadership, and that's why I'm running for Congress. Thank you.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Now we'll move into the questions, which come directly from residents in the 5th Congressional District. the first question, and it includes information that we want from you about what's going on now with the coronavirus. How do you rate the federal government response to the coronavirus? Jennifer Christie.
Well, America is leading the world in the number of cases as well as the number of deaths in the coronavirus pandemic. And so I wouldn't rate us very well. The White House knew for 2 months prior to taking action about the pending pandemic and were unprepared. Unprepared in terms of testing, in terms of having PPE for our doctors, our nurses, and our hospital staff. There weren't procedures in place. There was no plan. And let's not forget that the president also fired the biodefense unit, which was responsible for pandemic response. We need to have a goal, and that goal should be to eradicate the disease. And that means putting all that we have toward finding cures, stopping the spread, and investing into PPE testing with tracing, or else what we will see is wave after wave of this pandemic. So we need to put our efforts toward that. We are facing times where we see over 80,000 deaths due to this pandemic, and we also are seeing the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression. It is the fundamental responsibility of the federal government is the safety of the people. That is a fundamental responsibility, and that means we need to be focusing on a cure. I released a press statement in early April calling for some key things to help us through the pandemic. That includes universal basic income, Medicare for all, freezing mortgage and rent and utilities, and full deployment of the Defense Production Act.
Jennifer, thank you very much. Christina Hale, the same question. And remember, we're trying to keep the answers somewhere around a minute. Christina?
I'd give us a poor rating in terms of the federal response so far. I think the theme of the night is absolutely lack of preparation. You know, I talk to a lot of Democrats and Republicans and people that will probably never even vote in their lifetimes. And I've found a theme. People expect the adults in charge to know what they're doing, to be there for the right reasons, and to have a plan. There was not a plan for this catastrophe or very likely for any other. And I think that is why collectively we are feeling so unsettled now, reopening. And I'd also like to highlight an op-ed that was written recently by the CEO of Eli Lilly in the Indy Star. In it, Dave Ricks tells us we have to proceed with data and with caution. That's the theme for moving forward. We cannot afford a resurgence. We have to pay attention to the science, and we must be prepared for this catastrophe, for a possible resurgence, and for any other that is to come in the future. There's a lot at stake.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
Well, I think I'd give us a C- at the federal level on this one. I have to give some points because this was almost entirely unexpected, and it highlights an unfortunate reality of our federal system and politics at large, and that we are much more reactive than we are forward-thinking and forward-looking. One of the things that I've been watching on the internet are old talks from scientists who are warning about this kind of thing for the last 10 years, but it doesn't seem that anyone really was taking them seriously. And we have that problem across so many different issues. So if there's one thing that we should take away from this, I think that it is that we need to listen to our experts more, and we need to take these potential threats that are a little more abstract a little bit more seriously.
Andy.
But as far as Donald Trump's response, I believe he was slow to the punch. He didn't accept those testing kits from the World Health Organization. It was debacle.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton, your turn.
You know, it feels like we're watching an episode from The Apprentice, and my response is that you're fired. And here's why. Arrogance and pride have no place in a well-managed organization, and certainly it's not flattering for our world leaders and during a pandemic. You know, the scientists have been telling us that a pandemic was inevitable. This administration has just failed. They were briefed on a pandemic plan and refused to use it. We have defunded institutions that are critical resources to help us in such a crisis. whether it's the National Institute of Health, whether it's the CDC, the World Health Organization. And as early as February, our State Department provided over $100 million worth of PPE to China. And we probably had, and I'm sure we had, occurrences here in the US. And so finally, our president calls it a hoax and continues to spread misinformation. We should have invoked the Defense Production Act earlier. We can and we must do better.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Another question along those same lines from a voter in Indianapolis. How are you qualified to handle the current national emergency? Jennifer Christie.
Well, just to tag on what we have been saying, I think we hear over and over again that we need to listen to the science. We need to be leading with the science. And that's one thing that I bring to this job is the thinking of a scientist. I have spent most of my career as a change agent working in process improvement, and we need change. We need lots of change in environmental issues, change with respect to our healthcare. And so what I bring to the table is that authentic leadership along with the scientific thinking that we need and the humility of a mom to be able to go in and courageously get things done. I think this is indeed about character.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
I've focused my career on helping people in vulnerable populations, in particular in the area of public health. At Kiwanis International, I led the launch of a project to eliminate maternal and neonatal tetanus in the world. This exists in the 38 countries where women had the greatest difficulty in giving birth. I come back to Indiana here and discover we have the very same problems here as we do in those 38 dire countries where women don't even have access to health care. A third of our counties, 33 counties, don't even have a credentialed OBGYN that can deliver a baby today. We have 16 counties that have no hospital. Imagine you're a rural Indiana resident and you live in one of those counties and you come down with COVID, where we can see the epidemiology advances at a very quick rate. People get caught in danger and dangerous situations, and we have to step forward with principled evidence, with tried and true best practices, and this is a very solvable problem. We know how to do it, and it's time to take action.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs. Andy, you're muted.
Huh?
Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So
start again.
Thank you. What I would say is that I have been on the Hill. I've been around Washington politics my entire life. I'm familiar with the types of games that are played there. So I think I'm in a good position to hit the ground running when and if I am able to go there. On top of that, I would say that I have education as a lawyer, and I have an education in history. And on top of that, I, in my job, experience what happens when those laws are put into practice every single day. So I have an understanding of what the actual job is of legislation, of creating law. And I understand how that law then is put into practice. So I believe those would be huge assets in confronting the current crisis. The other thing that I would say about it is that I am from the younger, more progressive part of the party, and that we have seen over this crisis a lot of these ideas that were floating around are being implemented because of necessity. So I'm very familiar with these newer ideas like universal basic income, and I think I'm in a great position to understand the pros and cons of them and see them implemented the right way.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
So throughout my career, I have worked a lot with different organizations. I am Lean Six Sigma trained and certified. I have spent a large part of my career working in process improvement. I've worked to develop disaster recovery and business continuity plans and preparedness. And I also have experience in supply chain management. In times like these, we cannot underestimate the importance of very quick, accurate and honest and frequent communications from our federal, from our state, and from our local governments. And for the most part, I think Governor Holcomb has done a pretty good job in communicating. You know, as a candidate, I have been conducting weekly communication sessions with constituents inside the 5th District, and I've engaged subject matter experts to provide information to voters in these very uncertain times. And so, as the next representative, I have significant plans to improve constituent communications because I think that's the very first step to ensure calm and confidence in our leaders so that we can move forward.
Dee Thornton, thank you. While we're talking about coronavirus, a question that comes from a viewer, the Affordable Care Act, would you keep it? If not, with what would you replace it? Jennifer Christie.
So I am the only candidate that explicitly supports the Medicare for All bill. And if the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, it is that our neighbors' healthcare matters an awful lot. We have, as I mentioned, 80,000 people who have lost their lives to this and 30 million people who have become unemployed. And with that job went their health insurance. It's time to decouple health insurance from the employment. And that means treating healthcare like the human right that it is. Healthcare is a human right. It's time that we join the rest of the world and implement a universal single-payer system such as Medicare for All so that we can eliminate deductibles, copays, and premiums along with the extreme profiteering that goes on to make sure that every American has the healthcare they need. America has the highest healthcare costs of any place in the world. And those costs don't need to be that. I've worked in healthcare. I worked over a decade as a process improvement leader in clinical trials, and there is a lot of efficiency to be gained in implementing a universal healthcare system.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
As a single mom, I always made sure that my son Owen had health coverage, but I didn't always have it. And I lived with the stress and the fear of knowing I was one sore throat or broken bone away from not making a car payment or worse. And I'll tell you what's even more scary now. We've had close to 500,000 people in Indiana register for unemployment in 5 weeks. These are people that might never recover their health care benefits, can't possibly afford COBRA right now. I strongly support a public option. I also will support a plan that ensures that people can get to the doctor, pay for that visit, pay for the medicine and the therapy they need to be well, and have it not break the bank. People now are experiencing this COVID crisis, and sometimes they are neglecting other aspects of their health because we're staying away from hospitals and emergency rooms. We have to protect people's coverage that they have now, but for all of the people that have no coverage today and that we anticipate will not tomorrow, with the uncertainty, we must get to work urgently on a public option.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
Thank you. Single-payer healthcare is the only way to go moving forward on healthcare. I don't explicitly support Medicare for All because Medicare for All, or Medicare, the program itself, is not entirely a single-payer system. You have Medicare Advantage that uses private health insurers to supplement the benefits that people over 65 get from Medicare. I do believe that there are so many advantages to having a single payer system, and you see that with the rest of the developed world. I mean, that is how this is done in other countries, and it's how we should be doing it. And I would support anything to move that way. As far as Obamacare is concerned, it was a great patch. It was a great fix. And I think it's an interesting preview of what's going to happen because they set out to do single payer under Obamacare. But your problem there is that you got lobbyist dollars on both sides of the aisle going to Washington, D.C., and private health care is big money for a lot of people who don't want to see that change. So it's going to be an uphill battle to get single payer, but I do absolutely believe that it is the only way forward for the health of our economy and for the solvency of our nation. Thank you.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
So no American should be one illness away from bankruptcy. You know, our country has spent decades debating the fixes to our healthcare system with a patchwork of solutions. We've spent more than any other high-income country in the world, and we have the lowest life expectancy. Infant mortality is a measurement of overall health of a society, and we are among the worst. We have 3 different federal health care programs, and I think it's important to understand this. We have Medicare, Medicaid, the VA, the CHIP, the Affordable Care Act, the Employees Health Benefit Program, the federal one. We have a 9/11 plan. We have a plan for American Indians and Alaska Natives. And then we have a host of private insurers, hospitals, prescription drugs, health professionals, working to deliver a variety of services. And so the question is, how do we transition to a universal healthcare plan that takes all of this into account? And I prefer a transitional approach. We have to stop the efforts to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and the Medicaid expansion, by the way, known as HIP 2.0. We have to cover pre-existing conditions, and we need to provide access now for those impacted by COVID-19. Now, I support expanding Medicare, and I would like to look at us expanding it for those who are 50 to 64 years old and allowing them to buy into the Medicare system. And thirdly, we must reduce the cost of prescription drugs and allow the federal government to negotiate drug prices.
Dee Thornton, thank you. We'll move now from coronavirus to a different topic. How do each of you candidates plan to address climate change, or do you? Jennifer Christie, we start with you.
I am the only candidate to have released a climate agenda, and you can find that on my website, which is jenniferforindiana.com. And in that climate agenda, you will find that a number of things that will help us to specifically become carbon neutral by 2050, which is the important date set out by the IPCC to be able to save this planet. That includes passing a Green New Deal, ending all subsidies, current and future, to fossil fuel companies, implementing a carbon fee at the source, such as HR 763, banning fracking, banning drilling on public lands and moving away from coal, investing in innovation and reforestation, and upgrading all of our infrastructure. And what that means is a lot of jobs, tens of millions of jobs to implement a Green New Deal and solve the climate crisis. That's exactly what we need right now to save the planet, and also the economic stimulus that we will need after the COVID-19 pandemic. I will also note that I'm the only candidate to sign the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
Let's get specific about Indiana and CD5. I'll tell you, Indiana has some of the worst air quality of any state in the nation and has for far too long. We've been a dirty coal-burning state for much of our history, and we feel its ill effects in extraordinarily high rates of asthma and other diseases. There is, however, opportunity. Indiana will have to expensively retrofit or rebuild our energy production infrastructure. It's old, it's tired, and there are new technologies that we can leverage and take advantage of. And yes, we can build green new jobs and the very high wages that come with those. This is a tremendous time for opportunity for Indiana and also for the Indiana manufacturing community and other business entities that can also enjoy reductions in cost and leverage also a workforce here that is going to need to pivot to jobs that don't exist today. There's great opportunity, and we have to, as a state, stake our lead and take steps forward now while we still have time.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
Thank you. As far as addressing climate change, I think that there are a lot of things that we could be doing. The number one most important thing, I believe, is subsidizing solar energy. And we need a distributed local network. We need people to have solar panels available around them. This is important for several reasons, but I won't go into it. But the most important is that then each of us individually are monitoring our energy consumption. And you've got to remember that the energy crisis is an aggregate of all of our energy consumption. And right now, we don't really have a good awareness of exactly how much we're using on a daily basis. And that's those solar panels attached to houses are going to be a nice limitation there and to kind of rein that in. Number two thing is public transportation. We need to get away from being a society that uses cars to commute. We need remote working to become the new standard, because then we have far fewer people on the road. We also need to change the way that we do urban planning, and we need more mixed use development, and we need communities where all of our wants and needs are within walking, biking, or scooting distance. Now, I also support a carbon tax, and that's how we address problems at the industry level. I also believe that we need strong cooperation internationally. We need to partner with countries that are as advanced as us to continue to produce newer technologies. And we also need to help leapfrog emerging industrial countries over oil into newer technologies. And finally, this is just something that doesn't get brought up very much, but we need to fix what's going on with NASA. Because NASA did a lot of Earth sciences, and then science on places like Venus that gave us a lot of insights into what's going on with our planet. And one of the first things that Donald Trump did when he took office was to limit that. So that would be those would be just a short list of things I would do on the climate.
All right, Andy Jacobs, thank you. And again, please try and keep your answers to about a minute. Dee Thornton, your turn.
First, we have to have leadership that believes that climate change is real. We must follow the science, and our leaders must listen to the experts. The damage from climate change includes millions of people being displaced by rising sea levels. There will be lower crop yields. There are spikes in diseases. There are catastrophic economic losses. And in the United States, we already spend billions of dollars every year to recover from ever more powerful hurricanes, wildfires, and flooding. And so I will work to strengthen the EPA and make environment a priority in everything that we do. We must rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. 196 countries are there, and we're not. This is something like the pandemic. We cannot do this alone. We have to strengthen and enforce the rules that we already have in place to keep our air and our water clean. And we must invest in green technologies. And that's going to be more important than ever as we rebuild this economy after the pandemic. If there's one thing that the pandemic has shown us, is that simple lifestyle changes can make a big difference as well. Carbon emissions have been down during the stay-at-home orders. And so I pledge to do everything within my power to protect our environment for our children and for future generations to come.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Here's a question that comes up every election year, it seems, but nothing ever changes, or so it seems. The question is, do you support term limits? This comes from a voter in Cicero. Jennifer Christie.
I do not oppose term limits, but what I would say is that the problems we have go much deeper than just limiting the amount of time that someone is in office. Our framers did think about this, I believe, and they felt that the voters should make that decision. As I said, I'm not opposed to it, but I believe it goes much, much deeper. It gets into money into politics. We have corporate money that is in politics. We have the Citizens United decision. Unfortunately, we have corporations that can spend unlimited amounts of money on their favorite candidate. And that is the root of the problem. It's the reason why we haven't solved the climate crisis. It's the reason why we haven't solved healthcare and so much more. So term limits are important, but it won't get to the root cause. We also need to improve voter access. So we need better elections, freer elections, and we need to make sure that we get corporate money out of politics, and that will solve the true root of the problem.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
I think Jennifer wisely outlined some of the issues that we really do have here, certainly in Indiana, but across our country. I'm open to term limits, but I just want to remind everybody listening tonight, Indiana had the worst voter turnout of any state in the nation in 2014, and we continue to be in the top 10. It's our civic responsibility and duty. There are so many barriers, more than I could even state here in this 1 minute. We have to get also dark money out of politics. We have to ensure that we no longer have gerrymandered districts. Let's not forget, Indiana voted for Barack Obama in 2008, yet everyone considers us a blood red Republican state. That's just not the case. We have to bring fairness, transparency, and honesty to our election process. And I would also argue we need to shorten the campaign season. I think many of the people listening today might agree with that one, and maybe even my colleagues here running for this office. I joke, but this is so incredibly important to the future of our democracy. It's urgent, it's important, and we have to pay attention to it.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs, do you support term limits?
I do not support term limits. I actually oppose them. And it's a lot about what you've heard so far. I think that it's kind of a build the wall type solution. It makes a lot of practical sense. When you really dive into it, you realize that it would have some dramatic unintended consequences. The first is a massive changing of hands of experience in Washington, D.C., because you have to realize that these people are going to be out of a job in fairly short order, and the number one place is going to be hiring is going to be the lobbyist firms. So all of the legislative experience that we have in Washington, D.C. is going to be transferred into the hands of lobbyists if we were to enact term limits. I think that we're hitting the nail right on the head with the hammer, with the problem being fair elections. And the problem is money. It's not dark money. It's not money from corporations. It's money in general. We need publicly financed elections so that we have fair elections, so that our candidates are on equal footing and that we judge them based on the content of their ideas and their character and not based on how much money they're able to raise from who knows what.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
So I do support term limits, and I signed the term limit plan or pledge, and here's the reason why. In my 30-year career in business, I was fortunate enough to serve in a variety of roles, and I think the opportunity here is to have term limits so that we continue to have a fresh perspective on things. What term limit says for me, the first thing I'd like to see is for us to lengthen the length of service for House of Representatives. And this will also get into the money issue. You know, at a 2-year term, you go into office, you're there for the first year, and then you're starting to fundraise so that you can get reelected for the second year. So I'd love to see us increase the term of the House to 3 or 4 years, and then a maximum of a couple of terms, 8 years. 8 to 10 years would be the max. And then we'd always have some fresh new ideas coming in. Our founders never intended for this to be a lifetime appointment, 30 and 40 years in Congress. And I do think that we are in a transformative time in our government. We need fresh thinking, fresh ideas, and I support term limits for that reason.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Let's continue to talk about Congress. What, if anything, would you do to bridge the partisan divide that currently exists in Congress? Jennifer Christie.
Well, I am willing to work with anyone to get these important issues done. So I'm willing to work with anyone, but I think it's also important that we take a stand. So there are times certainly for compromise, but there are also times when I believe we need that strong progressive voice like mine to take a stand, a firm stand, and I will do that when others will not. So I think it's very important that we do work in a bipartisan way and that we craft legislation, but it's more important that we stick to those values. Right now, we do see bills that are passed, for example, that may not have the quality that they are, but we also see that when people stick to their beliefs, such as with the coronavirus relief package, we were able to implement unemployment supplements. We were able to assure that companies would keep people on payroll when we stick to those values. So I think it's important to work together, to compromise. I will work with anyone on these issues. And just to highlight that, climate change, for example, is one of those issues that we can work together on. The Indiana young Republicans actually chose climate change as their #1 issue. This is something that people care about across the political spectrum. I listened last night and saw several Republicans care about that. Same thing with healthcare and other important issues. It's time that we have a dialogue and we focus on problem solving, and that's what I bring to the table. So I'm willing to work with anyone, but I will tell you, I am also willing to take a stand on those values, and I'll take a stand when others will not.
Jennifer, thank you. Christina Hale.
I served 4 years in the Indiana General Assembly, and I got more than 60 bills passed. And I'm very proud to tell you that every single one had a Republican co-author or co-sponsor partnering with me to do just that. Most issues are not partisan, they're human. And a good legislator will develop personal and professional trust with their colleagues in their tribe and across the aisle to get good things done for people. I was a freshman legislator with Ben Smaltz. He's now chair of the House Public Policy Committee, and Ben and I certainly don't agree on a number of things, but I was determined to get something done to protect children from violent sexual predation. I showed him the evidence. I reached across the aisle. We worked together. We got a bill passed that's now law that says if you are a serious sex offender, if you're a child pornographer, you may never again set foot on school property. Parents care about that. People who care about children care about protecting them from this kind of dire circumstance. And once again, I'll work with anyone and everyone to get things done. It's not that difficult if you set pride on the shelf, if you share the credit, you do your homework, and you find those humans that care about the same things that you do.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
This partisan divide is largely political theater. I mean, when you look at beneath the surface, a lot of our politics in DC is run by lobbyist money. It's money that's donated to both sides. They try to buy the candidate. It doesn't matter what party they're from. And a lot of the issues that we argue about they're very abstract. They're out there. And while we're busy with this circus, we see major tax cuts being passed for the wealthy. We see a transfer of power up. We see the Congress with its power being limited and the growth of the power of the executive. And it's very troubling. And one of the most troubling things about it is it's gotten to the place now where most of our legislators in Congress don't even need to understand how to pass law. And we don't talk about that being the job of a member of Congress. The discussion is focused on opinions and this, that, and the other, and where people come from. And then when they get there and they finally have to show up and do the job, they pass the laws that are written by lawyers that are hired by the lobbyist companies, and they say, no, this does everything that you want it to do. So I think that I would be effective because I actually understand how these laws work, and I would be able to go in there with my eyes wide open.
Andy Jacobs, yes.
Yep, thank you.
All right, Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
So I've navigated a 30-year career in business, and as a business executive in management and in leadership, I know just how important it is to work together. Working cross-functionally inside of organizations is very, very similar to working across the aisle in Congress. I think we have to remember why we are there and what we are supposed to do as a legislator and as a member of Congress. In that we are there to uphold the Constitution and not be accountable to one political party or the other. There's no mention of loyalty to party. And so if we go there with the right understanding, then I think we can remove that partisan divide. I am so passionate.
Dee, we're having a little trouble there, and we will get back with you. We'll get that fixed right away.
David, I would like.
Yes, go ahead.
You had mentioned earlier we could do a quick tag on that, and I think that everyone here would probably agree. I'm running a grassroots campaign, and grassroots doesn't stop at the campaign trail. It goes into the office of the congressperson. And so one of the things I think we can do with regard to doing bipartisan work is to make sure that we are proactively working with communities and getting input into all legislation that is passed. And when things come from the grassroots up, that's how we get real change done. And I think everyone here would probably agree with that.
All right, Jennifer Christie, thank you. And we have Dee back, and Dee, we'll go back to you now so you can finish up your answer on that question.
Yes. So I think we have to remember why we're there as representatives in Congress, and that we're to uphold the Constitution. There's no mention of loyalty. There's no mention of party. And so I think if we go back to our reason for serving, which is to represent the people, perform oversight, and to help our constituents, and then we can truly do good work. Rest assured that I will not compromise my personal principles of truth, honesty, and integrity. And those things are sorely lacking in our federal government these days.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Let's turn now to immigration and find out what the candidates' positions are on immigration. Jennifer Christie.
We need comprehensive immigration reform. What is happening at our border violates all humanitarian values and standards that we should be standing for, and that needs to change. We should not be separating children from their families. It's appalling. We should be working with our neighbors and making a proactive effort to do that. We have people who are recipients of the DACA program. And I am a firm believer that we need to map out what needs to happen and give documented status to DACA recipients right now. There is really no other path for that. It needs to happen right now. And one of the things I think we can do is look at the process very detailed and look at where we can improve things. I think it is a very difficult process for people to follow, and through comprehensive immigration reform, we need to make the process simpler. We need to have greater access to courts so that we can help people through that process. We need to have more caseworkers and people to help shepherd people through the process so it is more well-defined, and it needs to, we need to uphold humanitarian values at our border.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale, what is your position on immigration?
All Americans, American families, we all have immigration stories. My grandmother came here from Cuba as an orphaned little girl with her sisters and brother with nothing, and were welcomed here. And my grandmother, Edith, was able to have a successful life, raise a family, pay her taxes, and contribute to society. And there are so many others like her. First, we, of course, need strong and secure borders, but we must stop separating our families on those borders. We have to have a clear pathway to citizenship, and we have to support our dreamers and even some of those kids that are too scared to dream. This is a solvable problem. Congress has passed a good deal of legislation to get toward that, but it's been stymied. And I also would like to underscore, particularly for this district, which has a good deal of agricultural land and farmers need access to low-cost labor. There are also economic reasons why we want to not only support workers coming to this country, but also our dreamers and young talent that are inclined to stay here and contribute to the tax base in our communities for their lifetimes. It's got to be empathetic, practical, humane, and we have to get it done now.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
One of the most difficult things I deal with in my job are cases where we know there are going to be immigration consequences to a conviction. And I see every single day these types of cases, and I understand that this problem is very complicated because we wrestle with the morality of what to do in those situations every single day. I do believe that we need to improve resources for immigration, because the heart of this problem is that there is a 10 to 15 to 20 year waiting list for people who want to do the process right. You hear that from the other side all the time. Well, why don't they just go through the process? They can be here, at the end of their life. That's essentially how it works. So we need to increase resources so that there is more legitimate means available to people. That opportunity exists so that people don't feel the need to overstay their visas or do the kinds of things they're doing right now. But it is a tough and ultimately case by case basis, which is why we need more people employed doing this kind of work. Thank you.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
Sadly, the biggest problem with immigration is the fear that this administration is promoting in America, and the division that it is promoting. Immigrants contribute to this country. They are the doctors, they are the engineers, they're the business owners, they're the healthcare workers, they're the caregivers. They're the migrant workers. And to Christina's point, we have many migrant workers right here in the 5th District. And these people help provide our food supply. And so I strongly support reinstating DACA. These young people, they are excelling in schools. We made a deal with them, and we've reneged. They are joining our military. They are serving in our communities. They're making big contributions to our country. And yes, they are paying taxes and they are contributing to our economy. We can't do without them. And we do need a comprehensive immigration policy. We always have needed one. And so am I for strong borders? Absolutely. I believe there's a much better and more efficient way to protect our borders. And, should we deport people? Yes. And I support the administration when we were focused on violent criminals. But at the end of the day, we have been needing to revamp and revise our immigration system for many, many years. And I really do think it should start with an overhaul of our visa system. And so we can certainly do better. We can value the contributions of every single American in this country, and as well as our immigrants and our undocumented workers.
Dee Thornton, thank you. In light of coronavirus, we've added in a stimulus package trillions of dollars to the national debt. Let's ask that question of the candidates. What should be done about the national debt? Jennifer Christie.
As I have mentioned, I am a strong supporter of the Green New Deal. We have so much work to do to solve the climate crisis that putting people to work to solve our toughest problems will be the best economic stimulus that we can ever have. We will create tens of millions of jobs by doing that. It's time that we invest in a new way of thinking. Things have changed from COVID-19 and this pandemic, and we cannot go back to the way that they were. We have to be innovative and change in a forward-thinking way.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
I was disappointed when Congress chose to raise the debt ceiling as part of the Trump tax bill in 2017, but this isn't just the debt ceiling. This is also about the incredible debt we are taking on in terms of public infrastructure. A third of our bridges in Indiana, for example, are structurally deficient. We're going to have to expensively rebuild them. We see what happens on our streets with potholes and our eroding hardscapes. But underneath the ground as well, our water infrastructure is falling apart. In some places in Indiana, it's the original 100-year-old wooden water pipe. That's going to be very expensive to replace. It's going to cost future generations an enormous amount of money. We have to continue to provide for the solvency of programs like Social Security and Medicare, but we also have enormous environmental debt that we're passing along. Not to mention what we will hear from a great deal of our young people, educational debt. For myself, I'm still paying my student loans that I took on when I was a student at Purdue. This is a big bill, and our youngest are going to have to pay for this. We're going to have to redouble our efforts in terms of the economy, and now we're facing this crisis on top of all of that. Congress has to look ourselves in the eye. We have to look our constituents in the eye and say, it's time to stick to the need to haves and really get to work on these critical issues that have to be answered and have to be paid for.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
This is a really tough issue to talk about because it is extremely complicated and there are a lot of moving parts to it. Ultimately, the mere fact that the United States has debt is not bad. The thing you have to keep your eye on is how much interest we're paying on that debt. When Alexander Hamilton was the Treasurer of the United States, he faced this problem of the Revolutionary War debt, and he conceived of this notion that the United States would have debt, but as our economy continued to grow, we would be able to pay off the interests and obligations under that debt. And so far we have, and for most of our history, we've maintained an excellent credit rating. So you want to keep your eye on that credit rating. That doesn't mean that we have unlimited money to spend, and we do need to cut down on corruption. We need to reduce the influence. I know I keep harping on this, but the influence of money in politics, because people donate to these campaigns, they expect something back on the other end, and that's where we're seeing a lot of this money flowing out. And also, one last thing, we need to reduce our foreign military intervention. It is expensive, it has hidden costs, and it's going to drag us down like an anchor.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
So, you know, our deficit is all about revenue coming in and expenses. And, you know, I think we cannot address this problem without looking at our budget. And half of the entire budget is defense spending. And it's important to keep our country safe. And that's the duty of the president. That's the duty of the Congress. The question is, how much money should we spend on our military? And I think we'll have to look at that. I mean, the United States spends more money on defense than the next 10 countries, and 8 of those countries are our allies. And so with our national debt climbing daily, and with our need to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, and this president requesting the highest military budget in the history of this country, we have to look at that. And I do believe we can spend less. We can spend less and keep our country safe, and not just throw money at the military, but start to prioritize our threats. We have to look at cybersecurity and terrorism and this pandemic and global warming, and are also threats to our health and our safety. So moving forward, it's all about keeping Americans safe, not only from foreign enemies, but also preparing us for pandemics. And so we have to be a lot smarter about how we spend our government dollars, our taxpayer dollars, and we have to provide strenuous oversight on those dollars as well.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Our final question now, this from a voter in Cicero, and I ask you to keep your answers to about 30 seconds on this one. It's a pretty straightforward question. Do you support eliminating the Electoral College? Jennifer Christie.
Yes, I do. One of the things that I did after the 2016 election was I really studied this and reached out with several other activists to try to influence the Electoral College to vote their conscience. I think that's what it was intended to be for, but it's become partisan. And we need to relook at that. So yes, I do support that.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
I think it's important that we engage in this public discussion. Certainly, I think a broader problem right now is that we are losing the public's confidence in the integrity of our election process. But at this time, in this moment, no.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andrew Jacobs.
No, I don't support it. I believe that it may be needing some tweaking, but the entire idea behind the Electoral College from the start was to balance rural and urban interests. And if we were to completely get rid of it, we would have a tyranny of the majority in the cities over people in rural areas. I don't think that that is fair. So no, I wouldn't be in support of getting rid of it.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
I would support getting rid of it. When it was established, I remember eighth grade history, reading and finding out that really the popular vote is not what elects our elected officials. That it is ultimately the electoral college, and the way the electoral college was structured. It was designed to not provide fairness. It was not designed, and it was that safeguard for those who were seeking the right to vote. And when those folks got the right to vote, that the populace would outnumber. And so I think we have an opportunity. Is it the first thing that would be on my list? In terms of the work that we do, no, but I think it is something that we should do. And I will tell you that I talk to so many young people and so many voters who will say, I'm not going to vote because my vote doesn't matter. And so when we count every vote, then and let everyone participate in the process and are civically engaged, then I think we have a true democracy represented for and by the people.
Dee Thornton, thank you. Well, we're approaching the end
David,
of...
I would like...
Yes, go ahead.
I would like to just tag on that, and just to reiterate also what Dee was saying. One of the things that the Electoral College does is it does violate the one person, one vote constitutionality. So I just want to put that out there for everyone. It doesn't give everyone an equal vote.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. We're approaching the end of the program. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for closing comments. And we go back to Jennifer Christie. Jennifer?
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you to all of the candidates for coming tonight, and thank you to everyone who's been watching. We're running out of time to solve our most challenging problems, such as climate change, healthcare, and so much more. This is our moment to take real action if we have the courage to do so. Politics as usual will not solve these problems. It's going to take new thinking, innovation, kindness, and courage, and our children are counting on us. And that's what I bring to the table: the problem-solving ability of a scientist, authentic leadership, courage and selflessness of a mom. And so I never thought I would be running for Congress, but as a mom and as a scientist and as an American, I am unwilling to accept the path that we are on. So I'm asking you to join me at jenniferforindiana.com and help be the change.
Jennifer Christie, thank you. Christina Hale.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to us tonight. Thank you for hosting town halls. This is an important part of our democratic process, and I think there are so many voters with voter fatigue and election fatigue, and it says something that you're spending this time here with us. I ask you to remember one thing about me. I'm not making promises to reach across the aisle and get things done. I've actually done that as a legislator. I've passed more than 60 bills, each one with a Republican partner. I'll work with anyone and everyone to get things done. I've done it well here in Indiana, and I am prepared to do just that as your representative in Congress. I'm Christina Hale, and I humbly ask for your vote in this election. Thank you.
Christina Hale, thank you. Andy Jacobs.
Well, thank you, everybody. And this has been great. It's been a wonderful opportunity to see what all of our positions are. And so thank you for hosting. Thank you for tuning in. You should vote for me simply because I'm qualified to do this job. I understand how the law works. I understand how the federal government works. I'm ready to go day one. And when you're voting for me, you know you're voting for someone who's going to go over there to write law. You're not voting for somebody who's going to be a telemarketer, and you're not voting for somebody who is going to defer the actual process of making the job or writing the laws to someone else. I'm also accessible. You can reach me on Facebook. You can send me a personal message. I'll respond to you there. There's a website, and all of that is available through Facebook. So reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. I'm Andy Jacobs, and I'm running for Congress.
Andy Jacobs, thank you. Dee Thornton.
Well, thank you very, very much for this opportunity tonight for all of us to be able to share our views. You know, we are facing a crisis as serious as any in the 244 years history of our country. And it's time for new leadership. We need a representative who has experience tackling big problems, who will act with integrity, who will put people's lives over big money that is increasingly running our politics and our politicians. My 30-year experience in business, my training in problem solving, my knowledge of our district and our people make me the right candidate. I will focus on you and your families, on issues like healthcare, education, the environment, the economy, an economy that works for everyone. I ask for your vote so that together we can get our country back on track and build a great future for our children, our grandchildren, for this district, and for this country. I am the right leader, and this is the right time. Please visit Dee Thornton for Congress, and thank you so much.
Dee Thornton, thank you. And thanks to all the candidates, and especially thank you to the viewers. Also, we want to thank all of our partners. For more on the project and the 5th District race, go to indianatownhalls.org. Now, while you're there, please complete the survey developed by IU Northwest. The results will help Indiana Town Halls understand how to make future town halls better meet your expectations. Survey should take no more than 5 minutes to finish. Your responses will be strictly confidential. Thank you. Don't forget to vote, and good night.
This virtual town hall meeting is presented by Indiana Town Halls and WFYI Productions, with support from these partners.